Smart Solar on Farmland report. Give me 1 second here. All right, so as you can see from our agenda this morning, we will hear from the Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection and the Commissioner of Agriculture regarding our findings. We will then dive into the report's findings and initial recommendations. We will also hear from a couple of the project's advisory committee members who have supported this work before we open the webinar up for questions. So before we hear from the commissioners, I want to take a moment to introduce my two fellow co-presenters, Ethan Winter and Alexis Pascaris. Alexis is the founding director of AgroSolar Consulting, a small independent consulting firm based in Upper Michigan. Alexis is a social scientist and policy specialist working to advance sustainable land use, farm viability, and renewable energy through agrivoltaic solutions. Ethan is AFT's National Smart Solar Director. Ethan joined AFT in June 2021 as our first Northeast solar specialist. He's our National Solar Director now. He was previously a project developer and community engagement manager for a leading national solar developer. Prior to working in solar, Ethan directed the Land Trust Alliance flagship New York program. I am also joined this morning by my colleagues at AFT, Jim Hafner, who's a New England director, Emran Irby, who's our AFT New England communications manager, and our New England policy associate, Robin Kerber. All right, so let's begin. Is Commissioner Dykes on the call?
I will check to make sure that she joins us shortly. Chelsea.
Okay,
sorry.
That's okay. We can start with Commissioner Hurlbert. If he's here, I can introduce him now.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, Commissioner, I will read your bio and then I'll turn it over to you. So,
Sure.
Sorry, 1 second here. Prior to Commissioner Hurlbert's appointment by the Lamont administration, he served as the executive director of the Connecticut Farm Bureau Association. In 2013, he was appointed by President Barack Obama to serve as the Connecticut State Executive Director of the U.S. Department of Agriculture Farm Services Agency, in a position where he was responsible for overseeing the agency's crop protection, disaster relief, and loan programs. From 2007 to 2013, Commissioner Hurlbert was elected to 4 terms in office as state representative for the 53rd District of Ashford, Tolland, and Willington. And Commissioner Hurlbert, we are very excited to have you here today, and we were hoping that you would discuss why solar development and related farmland preservation are important to the work of your agency. Well, and I'll hand it over to you.
Chelsea. I see my friend and colleague Katie has jumped on, and I know she's got an appropriations hearing before I do. So if she wants to go first, I'd be happy to give it back to her so that she can get her last minute preparations for appropriations and budget before she's got to step off. So if that's okay with you, Chelsea. I know how stressful these hearings can be.
That's fine with me. If it's fine with you, Commissioner Dykes, I'm happy to read your bio.
look at this interagency coordination live. Anyway, I have an amazing colleague at the Department of Agriculture. Thank you, Commissioner. And it's so wonderful to be with everyone today, and really timely as well. Yesterday, we announced or issued a notice that we are going to be revving up a request for proposals for grid scale renewable resources in coming months. And that includes a focus on grid scale solar. We have, just to put into context, we are in the middle of our transition in decarbonizing the electric grid. And this is probably the most nerve-wracking part of transitioning our grid to clean energy sources, because we have really significantly moved away from, permitting and developing new fossil generation resources and infrastructure in the state. But at the same time, we're not building enough renewables to be able to ensure that, our margins are going to be pretty tight in having adequate generation resources to be able to maintain the grid that we need. And at the same time, look at your energy bill. We're experiencing a lot of volatility in our energy prices. We know that our agricultural sector is experiencing that a lot when you think about what it takes to maintain our working farms across the state. And so, and part of that is because we continue to be reliant on fossil fuels that, with the war in Ukraine and a lot of geopolitical events that are going on, those prices are, very volatile. And they're not something that, we can control here in New England, because we're not producers of these resources. So energy independence continues to be something that we're striving for, and building out renewable resources is one of the really important ways that we can achieve energy independence and insulate our region and our state from those really volatile energy prices. So just a little, I got to sneak in a little bit of like the energy policy context here and talking about, why this stuff is so important. We've seen, during the pandemic too, I know everyone on this call, is familiar with all of the different, supply chain issues and interest rate increases and all of that pressure on our businesses. And the same has been true for the solar industry. We've seen a lot of, increases in panel costs, labor costs, and a lot of pressure. And that's resulted in more than 40% of the solar projects that we contracted over the last decade that had not been built yet, but had contracts. More than 40% of those have terminated their contracts and canceled out because of all the challenges that they were seeing in the market. So that's one of the reasons that we're pushing forward with this procurement now, because we need to replenish the pipeline of projects that we already had underway. So the good news is we've learned a lot, and in part because of the amazing, advocacy and support and engagement from AFT about how to better harmonize our policies around farmland protection and supporting agriculture in the state of Connecticut, and how to do so in a way that is consistent and aligned with our ability to scale up solar deployment. So we've learned a lot from, when we started doing these projects 10 years ago, and we have more to learn. And I'm really excited that as part of this RFP, we will have the opportunity for hearing more from stakeholders, from all of you, about how we can best ensure that the ways that we're developing these RFPs is incorporating the best information about eligibility criteria, special kind of consideration we should be giving to the best practices for siting solar in a way that is aligned with supporting our farms. So we started a process in the summer of 21 called the Steps for Solar process that was focused on, getting input on how to ensure our solar projects are built in an efficient and transparent and predictable manner, considering, local zoning and environmental considerations, minimizing and mitigating adverse impacts on agriculture and other natural resources. And so we have incorporated a lot of the feedback that we already got through that steps process in our RFP that we're designing that I just mentioned. In addition, we want to hear from you. We're holding a special webinar on March 29th. That will be an informational meeting where we want to hear from stakeholders. I know we'll have Chelsea and others there to share, perspectives, but this will be an important opportunity to get input on how to make sure that our RFP is considering all the best practices so that we can achieve a real win here for solar development and for agriculture. So we'll share, I know that there's information in the chat here that has the link to our press release that went out yesterday announcing these procurements. That links to the notice for the procurements, and there we go. Bruce Ho from our team has also shared the information about how to register for that meeting on March 29th. We're gonna, please let us know early and often if you have interest in being part of that webinar, and especially if you have, in addition to sort of just public comment, if you have specific kind of models and frameworks. I know AFT has done a lot of work on this that you'd like to present maybe as a panelist. We're organizing kind of panels for that webinar, and this will be a really exciting opportunity for us to get everyone a seat at the table in the design of this RFP before the draft of the RFP is complete. So, and again, this is for grid scale projects. Of course, there's lots of other types of solar development programs in the state, including the virtual net, shared clean energy facilities program and others. And so this is really just focused on the grid scale projects, but happy to take any questions you may have. I know this is very specific. I'm just focusing just on this RFP in my comments here today, but that's largely because we just had this exciting news about these RFPs getting kicked off yesterday. So timely to be with you today. And thanks for that opportunity.
Thank you, Commissioner Dykes. I think we'll hold questions until the end, and maybe we'll follow up with your agency with some specific questions that folks have. This is really exciting that you're making this announcement, or that you made this announcement yesterday and you are here with us today. And I do look forward to the webinar on March 29th, and we'll register and we will follow up with you about being a part of that webinar. That's great.
Fantastic. And I know a few from my team will be able to hang on even as I'm jumping off now to go testify, but others from our team will be able to hang on, or you can put questions in the chat that they can respond to. So thank you so much again for the invitation, for the time today.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to be here and stepping away from the appropriations hearing to present out on our important work and to discuss what DEEP is doing. So I think in the interest of time, we will move on to Commissioner Hurlburt. Welcome, Commissioner. And do you want to take a moment now to share with us how your agency is looking at solar development as related to farmland preservation?
Yes, and thank you, Chelsea, and thanks for allowing Commissioner Dykes before here. The Appropriations Committee waits for no one. This is a good excuse and a great meeting and a great opportunity to share out, but it won't fly with Sue Keene and the chairs over there as to our other responsibilities. So first, I just want to thank AFT and WLA for your partnership on these challenging issues, your attention to it, doing the legwork, and kind of exploring the question. I think it's fair for us to start off by saying there are no easy answers, there are no silver bullets, but it takes a lot of conversation, a lot of work, and a lot of exploring and painting the corners as to finding the best fit. And that best fit will be different for each farm. It may be different for different parcels within the same farm. I was recently at a presentation with Secretary Vilsack, and it was really, really interesting, and to see the Secretary go through kind of the state of agriculture, American agriculture. In 2021 and 2022, it was the best years for total farm revenue in the history of American agriculture. Those are great years. But he mentioned that only 10% of American farms actually made money. They made the most money they've ever made, but only 10% of farms made money. 50% of farms lost money during 2021 and 22. So the best years in American agriculture, 50% of American farms lost money. 40% made money, but it was small, and a lot of it had to do with off-farm revenue. And so he tailored the conversation about what are we going to do as policymakers, as leaders in this space, to help that 90% of the farms that didn't make money or made marginal dollars in the best years in American agricultural history. And he talked about a couple of things that I think are appropriate here that we've been working on in partnership with AFT and WLA to institutionalize in our agency or pursue funds at the legislature for. The first is climate smart practices. How can we invest in Connecticut farms to make sure that they have the resources available, the technical knowledge, the ability to implement climate smart practices on their farm? And we just rolled out, we'll be making an announcement in the next couple of weeks with our Climate Smart Ag and Forestry Grant Program, $7 million to do just that work. Food system work, that includes, local procurement and farm to school programming. Between the local food purchasing agreement, our Connecticut Grown for Connecticut Kids, we've put millions of dollars into contracting for small farms to feed Connecticut's children through our schools. And feeds Connecticut's food insecure population through pantries and relationships with pantries. Importantly, food share is at over 900,000 pounds of Connecticut produce that was purchased through this program. So those two programs are working. Farm energy was one that the secretary paused on for a while. This is a way not only to drive down the cost of production, reduce expenses on the individual farm, but also increase revenues, whether it's used to offset the energy used on the farm or sold back into the grid. And this could be through solar, it could be through anaerobic digesters, it could be through wind, it could be through other things. Relatively passive income for the farm or offset, which will allow more of their revenue to go back into the farm. And I think, the conversation that we're having today is appropriate. It's our mission at the department to preserve farmland, to ensure a healthy economic opportunity for Connecticut's farmers for future generations. And we do that with the purchase development rights. Very proud of the work we've done there. Over 400 farms, 48,000 acres preserved. We need more tools, and we're working on that to make sure that we can be responsive to the needs. But we also have to acknowledge that we need more energy production, as Commissioner Dykes mentioned, but we also need to make sure that it fits so that land is still available for future farms. And I know we've got Amanda here, Keith Bishop, two folks who have done an amazing job trying to find the right fit for their farm and for their constituents. And we need more of that sort of attention. And a document like this really allows us to have a roadmap, not only for policymakers and administrators, but for farmers and program implementers to say, oh, this is how we can do it in a way that doesn't forfeit one permanent natural resource for one, energy resource. And that's important, finding that balance. Because if we don't find the balance, we're going to have farms that aren't going to be able to maximize their resources and stay farms. And we're going to have a balance that is not in favor of the agricultural community. So I really appreciate the opportunity to have participated here today, participated in the effort for this report. I hope everybody takes a minute to look at it. I strongly encourage folks to attend Deep's presentation later this month to get your feedback in there. We're very fortunate that we have a commissioner in the department over there, our partners in agriculture, who want to be responsive, who want to understand this question, who want to be nuanced in their policies. And so we should take full advantage of that and use it to make sure that the policies that are driving forward are the ones that benefit all of us to the maximum benefit. So with that, Chelsea, I again appreciate the opportunity. I also have our appropriation subcommittee hearing this morning, but this is a really important conversation. I'm glad AFT is providing the leadership and the space for it, and look forward in that continued partnership in this process.
Thank you, Commissioner Hurlbert, for being here today and for speaking to what your agency is doing to look at farmland protection and solar siting. And we look forward to working with you to advance some of the great recommendations in this report. One of the recommendations is making sure that the agencies work together. So this is the first step in getting both you, Commissioner Hurlbert, and Commissioner Dykes on a call to talk about the report and the findings and how this can be used by the agencies to make sure that we are not trading solar development for farmland preservation and vice versa. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Ethan Winter and Alexis, who are going to speak to the findings and our research in the report.
Thank you, Chelsea. I can't imagine a better launch here than what we've just heard from Commissioner Hurlbert and Commissioner Dykes. So thank you both for taking time in your very busy schedule to help set the frame. For those who are not familiar, American Farmland Trust was founded in 1980 as a leading national organization dedicated to protecting farms and ranches around the country. And we are doing that in three ways: protecting the best farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and ensuring that farmers continue to have access to the land that they need to farm to feed all of us. I'm going to spend a few minutes to provide a framework for the work that Alexis did with us, and hopefully that will provide the context for the recommendations and how a state like Connecticut can really lead in this effort. Next slide, please. American Farmland Trust recognizes the issue of climate change. It is here and it's real. The state of Connecticut in January witnessed the warmest month of January in its recorded history. Now, we have three legs to our climate initiative. One is protecting farmland. We understand that farmland must be a part of the climate solution. And that means being very smart about strategic farmland protection and also keeping development as compact as we can through smart growth strategies. Second, we're promoting climate resilient farming practices, regenerative practices that build the soil and ensure that we have long-term sustainable agriculture. And this is a big focus for us, and we've had great support and partnership with states like Connecticut and with the USDA in this area. Third, we're advancing a platform for smart solar. This involves research, policy innovation, and collaborative strategies to ensure that farmers and farming communities are full partners in the energy transition that Commissioner Dykes referred to. I love the word harmonize. That's exactly what we're aspiring to in this work. And as Commissioner Hurlbert said, this is hard work. There are no silver bullets, and AFT's role in this area is really to find the best intersection where we can find win-win solutions as best we can. Next slide, please. Folks on this call who are familiar with AFT will be familiar with our Farms Under Threat report. This was released in 2020, and then we released a new report in 2022, looking forward to 2040 and modeling different scenarios, which I'm going to refer to in a few minutes. Solar has a very complex interaction with historical forces for land conversion and add climate impacts to the challenges to farmers. We want to make sure that folks understand what's in front of us, not only with the energy transition, but with the food that we need to grow for potentially 10 billion people by 2050 across the world. So we have both a huge energy transition in front of us, as well as a real need to think about our land base and growing food. And I believe the solar industry is really understanding the complexities in front of us. Solar can cut in different directions depending on how it's sited, how farmers have access to the land, and whether or not agricultural dual use or agrivoltaics is integrated at scale, particularly on the best farmland. Next slide, please. So again, I think Commissioner Dykes touched on this. We are looking at a build out for renewable energy resources in Connecticut and across the country. Based on AFT's analysis, 80% or more of the land that's most suitable for solar is agricultural land. And over 50% of that land is our country's most productive, versatile, and resilient soil, the best land we have. So we really need to think carefully about, again, displacement of agriculture on our best land, how we can integrate agriculture into our solar development, and how to make sure that farmers are equal and strong partners in this evolution. In the next few slides, I'm going to talk a little bit about the energy transition that's in front of us, just to provide some framing for Alexis. Next slide, please. So where are we? In the United States right now, we're seeing rapid growth of utility scale. Commissioner Dykes referred to grid scale solar. These are larger scale projects that connect to regional power grids. We are also seeing a real growth in residential rooftop solar, community solar, and commercial solar. But where we're going to see the greatest growth in the United States is utility scale solar. And that is a land intensive energy source that often is targeting farmland. We're going to see that in Connecticut with this RFP. I'm very excited to think about how Connecticut can lead in that procurement process to minimize impacts to our best farmland. The Biden administration has set very ambitious goals for decarbonization in the years to come. And we're going to need to accelerate, perhaps by a factor of 4, the rate of deployment of solar across the country to meet these clean energy goals. Next slide, please. Looking out for the next couple of decades, you can see where we are. We are just at the beginning of this transition. Most of this solar that we're expected to deploy will be larger scale projects, megawatt scale. In states like New York, we're seeing 200, 300, 500 megawatt projects on thousands of acres that are occupying productive, active agricultural land. Those are very big impacts potentially for agriculture in those areas. We're also at AFT very much encouraging solar on rooftops, smaller distributed projects to reduce the demand for land for these larger scale projects. But this graph from the Energy Information Administration highlights where we are at really at the toe of the hill here in this transition. Next slide, please. At AFT, we often get the question, how much land are we talking about for solar to meet the goals to address climate change? The Department of Energy in 2021 released the Solar Future Study Report. I think Emran will be able to put that report into the chat. The Solar Future Study modeled how we would get to decarbonization of our power grid by mid-century. And they evaluated that by state. A state like Connecticut would expect to see 30 to 35,000 acres of solar in the next 20 years. Some states would see 10 times that. New York, for example, could see that. States like Florida or Texas could see close to 1 million acres of solar in the next 20 years or so. So this is, again, a significant impact. What we've done is we've analyzed where that solar is likely to occur relative to states that already have significant threats to their farmland. And 8 of the top 10 solar states now are ranked as high threat farmland states by AFT. So we see, again, a real convergence of potential demand for the land and real needs for strategies to minimize accelerated farmland loss as we work forward. I'm going to wrap up here in a couple of minutes. I wanted to just contextualize Connecticut. Last May, Governor Lamont signed a law that codifies a zero carbon electricity goal by 2040. Today, solar is about 3% of the electrical supply for Connecticut. So we're talking about, again, very significant commitment by the state of Connecticut that is mirrored by states like Massachusetts, Virginia, and New York to do the same. Very significant transitions to clean energy, with solar being a major pillar of that, along with offshore wind, onshore wind, and clean energy imports. But solar is going to be a pillar of state level efforts to decarbonize in the years to come. Just to highlight this again, for the state of Connecticut, in our Farms Under Threat 2040 report, which I mentioned, we looked at a few different scenarios of farmland loss due to low density residential development and urban development. And what we found is that a business as usual scenario could see 55,000 acres of farmland loss over the next 20 years. And that doesn't really account for solar. So think of solar as potentially another layer or driver on top of that, or solar can be a way to buffer against those other forms of development. And one thing that really popped in our analysis is that that business as usual scenario would account for 16% of Connecticut's existing farmland. So we have both a need and an opportunity to think about how solar overlays onto the Connecticut landscape in a way that protects farming, protects the land base, and doesn't create additional accelerants to farmland loss. This is going to be really important in states like Connecticut that are land constrained and have very significant and ambitious clean energy goals. Other states like Massachusetts, New Jersey, Maryland are in a similar situation, thinking about how they're going to navigate this, and AFT has been engaging there as well. Next slide, please. So just again to highlight, the Solar Future Study factored about 30,000 acres potentially for Connecticut to meet those national clean energy goals. And by comparison, we have about 60,000 acres of pasture land remaining in the state of Connecticut. So if all that solar were to go on pasture land, we have very significant impact potentially. If there are ways to integrate agriculture and grazing on that land, we have some win-win outcomes. And that's where government incentives and the recommendations in this report can really help provide a roadmap for the future. To guide this work, AFT has developed 4 principles around smart solar, and we are actively operationalizing these principles both at the state, regional, and national level. The first, again, is to prioritize solar in ways that doesn't impact farmland, and particularly farmland that's best suited for farming and for local food production. Second is safeguarding the ability of farmland to be used both during solar and after decommissioning. So that means a real focus on soil health, thinking about land as an asset and not dirt where we just put in the solar. Really important work, and states are paying more attention to soil health now as they're thinking about energy procurement. Third is growing agrivoltaics. That's the fancy word for integrating solar and energy on the same piece of land for the duration of the project. Next week, AFT will be joining a number of other stakeholders from around the country for a conference in Chicago, the first national conference on agrivoltaics. This is an area that's growing quite rapidly, and Alexis has been a leader in this space as well. We're really excited about the potential, but it's going to take standards, a real focus on evidence-based and science-based methods, and continued innovation in the policy arena so we get the incentives right for agriculturally compatible solar. And finally, we use a lens of farm viability in all of this work. If this can work for farmers and rural communities, we really are going to have a successful energy transition. And that's my tee off to Alexis and our report. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Ethan. Just want to start by saying good morning to everyone. We're really happy about you all joining today. So as introduced, my name is Alexis Pescaris. I own and operate my small independent consultancy here. I'm based in Upper Michigan, but I have the real joy of partnering with some great organizations like the American Farmland Trust. So I just want to start by saying it's been awesome working with you, Ethan, Chelsea, the whole team. It's been an awesome opportunity. And driving your smart solar initiative is really near and dear to me. So this is my chance to walk through the Connecticut Smart Solar Project, including the process, the findings, and the resulting recommendations for the state. But because we have a limited time and a lot to talk about, I'm going to do this differently than your classic show and tell. So rather than presenting the study findings and then discussing the implications, I'm going to oscillate between research findings and recommendations so you can like follow the process and logic more efficiently. So the project started, the Connecticut Smart Solar Project started back in April 2022, so last spring. We convened an advisory committee, which includes representatives from CT Farm Bureau, Yukon Extension, Connecticut Resource Conservation Development, and many others. So thank you, Amanda, Bonnie, Joan, Amy, Kip, Keith, and Ben. You guys are really critical to this effort. So this robust team collaborated on the design and dissemination of a survey, which we distributed to farmers and farm landowners in the state. And a big thanks to everyone who supported that distribution effort, including DOAG, Yukon Extension, and Farm Bureau, many others. So the survey flowed through as many robust channels as possible. Concurrent to the farmer survey, we engaged solar developers. So that was first through one-on-one interviews and then through a roundtable discussion that was held in the fall. We then took all this insight across both sets of stakeholders, farmers and developers, and worked iteratively with the advisory committee to develop appropriate recommendations for smart solar in Connecticut. And the final report that we've gathered around today reflects this. It reflects multi-stakeholder cross-sector engagement. I just want to say that the Connecticut report is not intended to be exhaustive or absolute, but actually it's just a really good launching pad for all this, for all of us coming together. It helps inform future action, future research, future legislation in the state. So I would just want to flag that and walk through some key findings together. Next slide, please. So through the farmer survey, we achieved a sample of 179 respondents. We captured socio-demographic variables ranging from role on the farm to gross farm revenue and much more. And then here are some of the key demographics to give you a sense of who responded. We got great geographic representation. So looking at the map on the right, you can see a pretty even spread, but majority of responses are coming from Hartford, Litchfield, and Windham counties. Both farm landowners and owner operators shared their thoughts with us. A few other responses came from farm employees or spouses of the owner operator. Interesting, nearly half of the respondents reported being younger than 45 years old. So about half of our respondents were younger than 45, but USDA census data reports that majority of Connecticut farmers are older than 55. Just want to pause here and like maybe consider what this younger respondent demographic might mean. And maybe this cohort is more attuned to these issues, more fearful of climate change, or perhaps they're more interested in this type of diversification. I'll just let you consider that. It's interesting to pause and think about where our responses are coming from. It's also interesting to look at farm size. So we asked folks to know how many acres on average are part of your farm operation. And there were two outliers. 2 farmers reported farming 3,000 acres. 32% of respondents are farming between 50 and 100. So that was the most common or the mode of the acreage data set. But the majority, 53%, are farming less than 50 acres. So when we walk through survey findings, just consider that the voices are coming from all over the state. They represent mostly younger producers raising specialty crops, and they're operating what the USDA would call a small farm. And that's a rough average archetype of our survey respondent. But there's a lot of diversity here too. So this sample provides a really great snapshot of perspectives in the state. Next slide, please. So our survey found mixed perspectives about farmland solar. We began by measuring general support for solar on farmland. Looking at the center graph here, we found that support for solar is very nuanced. And the 26% of people who said their support depends on something provided open-ended responses. And I analyzed those open-ended responses and identified 3 key factors that have implications on support. So in that purple box, I've noted the 3 key factors that support was contingent on. So number 1, the size and location of the array, meaning, is it on a rooftop? Is it on non-tillable land? Does it occupy the majority of farm acreage or just a small portion? And this context matters. Another key factor is number 2, the ability to leverage solar for dual purposes. Does the solar impede farming, or can we continue to do what we love and what we need to do? And this is critical. Folks commented about support for dual use solar, but strongly opposed solar that takes farmland out of production. And factor number 3, the extent of economic benefits. So respondents talked about interest in satisfying on-farm energy demands and saving on electricity costs. Lease payments were also attractive, and this was big from a farm viability perspective. Can you bring up the quotes, Emran? Thank you. So these quotes I just pulled, they demonstrate how support for solar on farmland is contingent on these key factors. Like, I would support solar on farmland if, and maybe just take a moment to read those to yourself. I just want to say that in the report, we also explored how respondents think solar development will impact the viability of farming in Connecticut. And that's what that pie chart is there at the bottom, but I'll encourage you to check it out and explore beyond my high level remarks. So the takeaway here is that support for solar is nuanced, and that nuance is what we care about, and that's what matters. So the survey continued to dig a little bit deeper, and we'll go to the next slide here. And this is where we really start to analyze a full range of impacts and concerns for Connecticut farmers. So ranked in descending order, impacts on farmland preservation, impacts on land prices and land access, and impacts on farm productivity. These were all identified as most concerning. And these findings emphasize all the flags that Ethan rose earlier about land impacts of development and the farms under threat projections in Connecticut. All these concerns about land prices, access, and preservation are connected. But what these findings do is provide validation that these are the key concerns to be mitigated when it comes to farmland solar. So remember these concerns when we discuss our recommendations in a future slide. But we'll go to the next slide here, because we also assessed preferences for solar siting based on different types of farmland. And these responses are ranked from most opposed to most supported. So where would you prefer solar be sited or not sited at all? Majority of respondents, 52%, feel that USDA prime farmland and soils of statewide importance should never be subject to solar development. We also see preference for actively farmed and farm-owned forests to be safeguarded. And these are bracketed in red at the top. I also want us to consider where folks feel that solar is suitable. Marginal and underutilized land are bracketed in green at the bottom. And this is really interesting because it helps give us the context for discussion around how smart solar practices might protect prime farmland or how it might maximize underutilized land. And that's exactly the thought process behind our first set of recommendations. So we'll go to our next slide. And here we'll see our first 2 recommendations for smart solar in Connecticut. Number 1, maintain and expand farmland protection. Now that's loud and clear. And this includes expanding state funding and programs that support farmland protection and climate smart agriculture. But it also includes the need to incorporate smart solar principles into these programs. So this recommendation is kind of twofold. One is reinforce the conservation of productive farmland and guide the expansion of solar in a way that minimizes negative impacts. So as the growth of solar in Connecticut puts pressure on farmland, we recommend that the state both expands farmland protection programs and considers how smart solar can be integrated. And this could help safeguard prime soils, and it can also increase farmer access to solar on conserved farms. And going on to recommendation number 2, so we'll keep that slide up as I finish talking about implementing a farmland mitigation fee. And this fee would be imposed upon solar projects with significant impacts to agricultural resources. We recommend that the cost structure of the fee is based on the amount and quality of land, land use, and the project type. And this would direct development patterns to disturb sites and less productive farmland. The farmer preferences for solar siting that we identified earlier can help inform the structure. But this disincentive approach is really useful because it could also include municipal or statewide caps on farmland conversion. And this would mitigate solar impacts to land access and land price by maintaining a development threshold in Connecticut. Now we'll move on to the next slide. And so that was an overview of key farmer concerns and the relevant recommendations. But now we want to look at farmer interests in farmland solar, and we want to also start thinking about this from a solar industry perspective. So here we measured farmer support for various solar development factors. So that means we tried to understand what factors increase support for solar on farmland. The most supported factors, the big green bars, have to do with dual use solar and direct farm benefits. So 78% of our respondents support solar that serves a dual purpose. And Ethan gave us a great definition about dual use or agrivoltaics. And we also can say dual use includes pollinator habitat, which was ranked high in terms of support here. The two other factors that increase support is on-farm energy consumption and revenue diversification. And these themes are persistent throughout the survey findings. Dual use and direct farm benefits are critical. So they'll need to be reflected in future solar development in Connecticut. And here we'll go to the next slide. And we can think about, we recognize Connecticut farmers are interested in dual use solar, with solar developers. So here's a snapshot of the insights that we gathered from our industry engagement efforts. Both in interview and roundtable discussion, developers talk to us about their efforts to do dual use in Connecticut. They are primarily motivated to mitigate conflict with farmland. They see it as critical to their continuation, but they also care about rural economic opportunities and cross-sector partnerships. It was really great to see this intention and effort. But they flagged many barriers that challenge their ability to do dual use in Connecticut or to do farmland solar in general. And they elaborated on complexity and costs. The quote displayed kind of gets to this complexity. We talked a lot about regulatory gaps, how a lack of alignment between state agencies makes development challenging. The developers detailed how there's a lack of clear guidelines and expectations from the state when it comes to dual use. And some participants noted a general lack of capacity between agencies to effectively address these issues. Developers also stressed that elevating panels, like how you see in this picture, elevating these panels to accommodate farming increases project costs. That's a huge barrier. So I walked away from these conversations understanding that what we have in Connecticut is an industry interested in delivering dual use projects and farm compatible solar, but they don't have a clear path forward and the projects aren't cost competitive with traditional development. So in effect, this is keeping farmland solar or dual use inaccessible to farmers who want it, and it challenges the industry's ability to innovate. So this business as usual is kind of persisting. So to maintain farmer interest in dual use and address these industry challenges, we offer 3 more recommendations for Connecticut. So we'll go to the next slide here. So the combined insights from farmers and developers have informed these 3 recommendations. The third recommendation out of our 7 is to institute a cross-sector working group. This working group could represent farmers, developers, land trusts, regulators. This recommendation also calls for legislative support and funding to enable greater state agency capacity to focus on farmland solar. A boost in capacity, either through the working group or new staff positions, could support the development of standards, guidelines, best practices, and programs for Connecticut. This helps streamline opportunities for farmers and developers to engage in dual use or farmland solar in general. We also move further and recommend that the state explores a bid preferences for multi-use projects. So we recommend a study to evaluate the feasibility of a bid preference for multi-use projects. In effect, a bid preference would reward developers that incorporate dual use or climate smart agriculture into their projects. So preference would be given for projects that provide farm energy offset or are farmer owned or support a dual use. And this type of incentive is useful because it encourages industry innovation. It's exactly what we need. And we take this a little bit further by recommending that Connecticut also develops incentives and market mechanisms for dual use. So the bid preference is a good incentive, but it doesn't reconcile higher capital costs, and expensive projects just don't work. We won't see them come to life. So therefore, we recommend the development of market mechanisms, such as a tariff-based adder or preferential financing programs. An incentive program that could feature a tiered adder framework to drive solar towards certain types of farmland, like we discussed earlier, or encourage specific types of projects. The development of such a program could be led by the recommended working group. They could learn from other similar programs in the region and create one for Connecticut. And market mechanisms for dual use will make development more cost effective, which will ultimately increase farmer access to solar, and contribute to a legacy of better projects in the state. So these are heavy recommendations, and I'd love for you to read through them a little bit further in the report. So maybe we'll just pause here, take a deep breath. That was a lot, but we've got 2 more recommendations, and I'll just kind of move through them quickly. So we'll open up to questions and answers. So deep breath. So our industry engagement efforts also revealed a gap. There is a gap in their ability to design better farm compatible solar projects. Developers discuss needing guidance and support from the ag sector to do this right. These quotes illustrate that completely. They discussed how they would be better able to do dual use. I've heard farmers say developers say we'd have better agricultural outcomes with guidance from the state if there was more robust means for cross-sector collaboration. Asking developers to become farmers without a support system is a huge stretch. So the quote in yellow is a perfect example. We're not farmers, we're solar developers. So there needs to be a platform for some sort of collaboration and transfer of information. Next slide, please. And we also asked farmers what they need. So we'll go back. There's a bar chart there. Thank you. We asked farmers what kind of information and services that they are interested in when it comes to solar on farmland. And most frequently, 60% of respondents noted that they want information on dual use. They also want information on financial costs and benefits, impacts to soils, and information about site restoration. And this suggests that these issues need to be key features of Connecticut's smart solar siting approach. So farmers are seeking this information, which is indicative of what they care about and what gaps in knowledges and services need to be addressed. So that gets us to our final recommendations. Number 6 is to establish enforcement authority and smart solar siting methods. And this stems from developers' needs for guidance and farmers' needs for certainty and trust in smart solar. So we recommend that interagency enforcement authority and methods are established, and that's to measure and maintain performance over the lifetimes of these projects. And that would include rigorous eligibility requirements, maintenance standards, decommissioning considerations. And this is an effective way to uphold all of the farmer concerns identified in the survey, but also a good way to give the industry some structure to work from. And lastly, building on that and kind of tying all of this together, like we need a place, we need somewhere to go to. So we recommend that to support Yukon Extension as a key leader. And so it's clear that both sets of stakeholders need a reliable, trusted resource to serve as a hub for all things related to farmland solar in Connecticut. So therefore, we advocate for increased funding to support Yukon Extension's ability to serve as this key hub. It's encouraged that Yukon Extension explores their ability to contribute to regionally relevant crop trials, soil impact assessments, dual use demonstration. Engaging in a regional network partnership with other extension offices could be a really great start. In fact, Commissioner Hurlbert talked about DOAG's 2023 Climate Smart Agriculture Grant. This could be used to institute a technical assistance or a training program at Yukon Extension. And ultimately, this would increase Connecticut's capacity to drive smart solar solutions. So there's a lot going on here. There was a really high level overview of a really robust project. Please read further on your own time. If you go to the next slide, Emran, we'll keep this here. It's a summary of the findings and an overview of the recommendation. Please ask us questions in the chat. But right now we're going to transition, and we've invited members of our advisory committee to reflect on these recommendations. And we'll start with the delivery of a statement provided by Joan Nichols, the Executive Director of Connecticut Farm Bureau. So Chelsea Gazillo from AFT will deliver remarks on behalf of Joan. But thank you all for listening and hanging in there with me.
Thank you, Alexis. That was great. And you gave us so much to think about. And I do just want to echo that if you have questions at this time, please put them in the chat. And in about 10 minutes, we'll have some room. We have some room on the agenda to answer everyone's questions. So as Alexis mentioned, unfortunately, Joan Nichols from the Connecticut Farm Bureau was unable to join us this morning. However, we did send her a question to answer that she submitted a statement on. And the question is, why is solar development and related farmland considerations such an important issue for Connecticut Farm Bureau, and which of the findings and recommendations resonate most with you? And so I am thrilled to read this statement for Joan because I am a new Farm Bureau member and I work very closely with Joan. So Joan says, solar development and related farmland considerations are an important and complex issue that needs our prompt and immediate attention. It affects farmland availability and protection, private property rights, economic opportunities for farms and farmland owners, and our overlying concerns for the environment and the need to transition to cleaner renewable energy sources. Meanwhile, the regulatory and permitting process for solar is lagging behind the urgent need to address the issue sooner rather than later as commercial solar projects continue to take land out of agricultural production. The impact of solar on farmland preservation, land prices, land access, and farm productivity, along with the overwhelming interest in dual use solar, are two of the findings I found most useful to driving further policy and land use decisions. Smart solar methods, financial incentives, and market mechanisms that make dual use financially compatible with conventional solar installations are recommendations to be taken seriously if we are going to move forward as a collective community in addressing this complex issue. And so I want to thank Joan for sending that along. She's a great supporter in this work, and we appreciate all that she does for farmers in Connecticut. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Amanda Fargo Johnson, who is the Agricultural Program Director at Connecticut RC&D. She was also a member of the advisory committee that supported AFT's research, and additionally, she sits on the Working Lands Alliance steering committee. So Amanda, take it away.
Thanks, Chelsea. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate being part of the collaborative for the Smart Solar Committee that worked on that survey. Just for a little bit, for those who don't know who Connecticut RC&D is, we're a statewide nonprofit organization, and within our ag programs offerings, we do have the Connecticut Farm Energy Program, which we started in 2009 as a way to help farmers access incentives, both federally and at the state level, to implement on-farm energy projects. So when we talk about farm energy, it's important to kind of frame it as, why is it important? Several years ago, in partnership with Connecticut Department of Ag, we did our own survey of farmers with relation to on-farm energy. And back then we were finding a third to a quarter of farms are spending their operating costs on energy. And that's only increasing, right, with the prices. So we work with USC agencies, specifically NRCS and rural development. We're in the midst of a major deadline for the Renewable Energy of America program right now, which is March 31st. And so working with the REAP program, we've been able to help farms and ag-based rural small businesses implement over $25 million worth of on-farm energy projects. And so by doing that, we're allowing our farms to be economically viable, and then they're able to in turn provide competitive products in the marketplace. So while we're not actively involved with these large scale solar fields, we do keep our eye on it as it's related to the virtual net metering program through the years. And we get calls about it all the time. You know, landowners are getting farmland. How can they utilize it? How can they put in large solar fields? You may have farm families who are inheriting land and they don't know how they're going to pay the taxes or keep the land out of development. So they're looking at their neighbors who are putting in large scale solar fields. How can they be part of it? So that's why we're in tune with what's kind of going on and keeping an eye to the policy. So Commissioner Hurlbert mentioned it is all about balance. In our opinion, there's this effort to make sure we're meeting our very ambitious 2040 clean energy goals in the state, but how do we also keep our farms economically viable while making good land use decisions? So to touch on some of the report findings that Alexis mentioned that we think should be escalated, and it is an urgent matter as more land is being taken out of production and put into large solar fields, is looking at funding for agrivoltaic and dual use in an economically viable manner. There's been some talk about new creation of programs and things, but let's start with what Commissioner Dykes was mentioning. Let's look at our state procurements and making sure that they're most suitably offering incentives and adders like other states, like in Massachusetts might offer for dual use systems. Let's take a look at our NRES program through the utilities and making sure there's an adder there that might be available. So those are some ideas of just using existing programs and making sure that they're speaking to dual use and agrivoltaics and making them economically viable. We hear from installers and developers, as Alexis mentioned, they're interested in doing the right thing, right? They need guidance. So one of the recommendations from the report that we would encourage is making sure there's standards and BMP guides for those developers and pushing the envelope beyond just sheep. What else can we do? Can we grow crops? Can we have other livestock? And making sure we're doing it in a sustainable manner so that our farms are achieving climate smart practices. And then on the flip side, standards and guidance for farmers. Most of these large scale systems are not being owned by the farmer. They're getting a lease payment. Well, what does that mean for their farm? What's the tax liability? What's the long-term use of that land? What happens when the system expires? Who's there to help them decommission that system, recycle those panels, or put that land back into remediation and restoring that soil? So those are some of the things that we think are really important to develop tools that can be used by both the developer and the farmer to have a sustainable project. So again, I think it comes down to balance so we can reach our goals and making sure that we're helping farmers be economically viable and offset their energy as well. So thank you for listening to what we think is important, and turn it back over to you, Chelsea.
Thanks so much for that, Amanda. And so before we open it up for questions, I want to invite Ben Freund, if he is on the call, to say a few words about our report, because he was also one of the farmers on our advisory board. Ben, are you still with us?
Yeah, I am. So, yeah, it was a very interesting and important project, because I think you have farmers that have expertise in agriculture. You have builders that are expertise in putting these systems together. The administrative thing, you have people like Amanda who are experts in finding funding for this, but we don't have that critical person or ability to find out how we can integrate this in a manner that has legs going forward. So, the report is very important in pointing out this deficit, and it's something that remains a mystery. We're not quite there yet. And but we have to find someone who has interest in moving this forward. The developers really need to meet their bottom line. The farmers really are expert at what they're doing, as I suggested. But who can be there? Can UConn step in? Can they provide this kind of expertise in getting this integration going forward? That's so important, because, as everyone has stated, this is something that's accelerating. It's something that's going to impact large tracts of land going forward. And how can we do this intelligently? Thank you.
Thank you for those remarks, Ben. And so we have one more farmer with us that we would like to invite to say a few words. Keith Bishop, would you like to speak to this project and to say a few words on our report? Keith, are you there? All right, so maybe Keith has stepped away from his computer for a moment. So while we wait to hear from Keith, I'm going to hand it back over to Ethan and Alexis, who I think are going to MC us for the question part of this webinar.
That's great.
Oh, Keith is here. So Keith, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Thank you. Sorry, disruption there for a moment when you're talking. Just say I appreciate being a part of the process here, and as it's already been reiterated a number of times, protecting productive farmland from massive overtakings by solar grid size operations is critical, and how we can have programs that financially support cooperation between farmers and offsetting pieces that will enable dual use solar, for example, to help productively produce power on farms, behind the meter for farms in particular, is important for the viability of farmers going forward. And as Brian mentioned before, what the financial productivity income level of farmers is borderline in a state like Connecticut. And so we've got to do all we can to promote farmers' productivity and economic returns, and that includes the energy side of it. So that's my comments, and I'll answer questions later on if there's any. Thank you.
Keith, thank you so much for your contribution and Ben's to this project. Really important to have leading farmers in Connecticut who understand the energy side, who are thinking about and implementing on-farm solar and other energy systems. We really appreciate all that you've done. Is there anyone else from our advisory committee, Chelsea, that is interested in offering a few words? I see Kip is on the call, and certainly would invite Kip if you want to say a few words.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. I think that having an idea of what the perspective is out there in the agricultural and the solar development community is really important. Provides some context, and I guess there's a couple of things that I would say. One, of course, is that it's important for people to understand. And I think you got a little bit of a picture of that from some of the things that Amanda and Alexis was talking about, is that there are on-farm energy needs on land that farmers own. In Connecticut and New England, there's a large amount of rental land base that is being developed in large-scale solar, which can have an impact on agricultural community. And then there are community systems. So it isn't necessarily this perspective that it's all farmer owned and farmer operated. So we need to take that into consideration as far as meeting energy needs, impact on not only an individual farm and an agricultural community as well, and that there are indeed research needs that we have as well. The other thing is I would encourage American Farmland Trust, working with the state departments of agriculture, to look at it on a more of a landscape and a regional perspective, because this is about sustainability. It's not about cheap energy or renewable energy, and it's not just about food. It's how do we combine all those things and not look at them in stovepipes, but that they're well integrated, that we're not sacrificing the best farmland in a community for the next 30 years that's supposed to be part of a regional food system, because we need to change our food system as well. So we need to have a more holistic perspective. If we're going to take, large acreages that were pasture and put solar arrays on them and continue pasturing, what might that do to, do we have the slaughter capacity? Do we have the markets for it? So look at the potential changes to the agricultural community and plan for that rather than being reactive. So those are a couple of thoughts that I have. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kip. Absolutely correct in terms of thinking holistically and regionally. And AFT is certainly interested in thinking about how to operate and think at scale. And we're going to need a lot of partners in this effort. So appreciate everything that you contributed to this project. We do have some questions in the chat, and I wanted to just address one right away. There was a question about who participated in the surveys and how we distributed that. Last summer, we produced a survey. It was through SurveyMonkey, and we used the channels from our project partners to get that directly to agricultural landowners and to farmers. So that included a fair amount of outreach from Yukon Extension, Connecticut Farm Bureau, Department of Ag, and their newsletters. And the idea was to really target, again, folks who are owners and operators and direct farmers in the survey. So that's how we got it out there. We had just under 200 responses there. There's another question about sharing the slides. We will absolutely do that. We will be putting all of this material onto the AFT website and sharing this. Give us a day or so just to get everything cleaned up. But yes, this is meant to be shared, including the recording. We have a question from Rick asking about, it's a great question, are we looking out the window of the bus while we should be driving it? And AFT and everyone who's spoken on this call, I think, touches on this challenge of trying to figure out how to, understand where the steering wheel for this bus is and how we can best steer it. This project was really meant to be, in some ways, an introduction to, strategies and policy mechanisms that Connecticut could develop, and certainly not the last word. This was really meant to be laying the groundwork for future conversations, and so timely with Commissioner Dykes' announcement on a major grid scale procurement. We're seeing in states like New Jersey, the grid scale procurement involving a dual use pilot program and county caps on how much land that's prime land within agricultural areas can be developed for grid scale solar. Those are some of the things that could be, or ideas that could be brought into Connecticut. But we definitely understand the challenge of both analyzing what's happening and also trying to influence policy at relevant scales.
Ethan, Keith Bishop again. Just a quick tangential piece as far as renewable energy. Wind was mentioned earlier in part of the slides, an opportunity, and it presents different set of problems than does solar. They both require land and obviously infrastructure to connect to the grid, et cetera. But from a zoning and land use standpoint, there are similar issues. Height of having towers, whether it's cell towers or wind towers, is a neighborly situation, but productivity where it's feasible on land sites for wind can be much better for agriculture than solar. Number of kilowatts per hectare or acre, et cetera. So I just want to insert that as we pay attention to where the needs are coming from and what's potential as new technologies are developed on the wind side of it as well.
Oh yeah, it's a great comment. States like Connecticut are going to, I'm sure, embrace an all of the above approach with this, and wind will be very site specific, and solar is going to be perhaps less so. And that's why we're really paying attention, given how land intensive the solar tends to be. But point well taken. And of course, the northeastern states are going to have a huge role to play in supporting offshore wind. There's a correlation between how much offshore wind we can develop and how quickly that can be operationalized and the demand on our land. But again, it's not a replacement. I think we're going to see obviously demands for both. Some other questions, Chelsea, anything you want to flag here? I see a comment about providing farmers with opportunities to get kind of direct offsets on their power bill. And I think that speaks to being really creative, both in the policy and in the private sector, and how benefits of these projects flow directly to hosting farmers and to the agricultural communities where these projects are located. Really thinking about how those energy benefits can accrue locally as much as possible, even if it's a grid supply project. Thinking about how the benefits of those projects can be magnified locally. There was a question from Joe about this framework, and I really want to credit Alexis for working with us and thinking about how a farmer survey, developer roundtables, agency engagement really sort of were the three legs of this project. And we think that is a framework for how we can work in other states. First of all, elevating the voice and concerns of farmers in this conversation, understanding where their concerns are, what they're interested in, and what are the knowledge gaps. And then again, rotating through developers and to the agency. So yes, we think this is hopefully a model for future projects in states that we're working in, and potentially others like state land extensions and others could take this model as well. But getting that baseline farmer information is so key. I'm not sure if someone else can, I'm trying to track through the questions here. Alexis or Chelsea, is there one that you want to tackle?
Yeah, sure. I see there's one from Zach. Hey, Zach, nice to see you here. Your questions about like how did I look across sociodemographic variables in relation to support for farmland solar? And yes, absolutely. It's kind of the first thing I do with a data set like this. And I pulled it apart, analyzing across role on farm. So like, were farm owner operators different than farm landowners in their attitudes towards farmland solar? I didn't find any statistically significant differences across the different types or role on farm. I didn't find differences either in age either. So each sociodemographic variable that I showed was regressed against support for solar, and the lack of significance across those factors. Perhaps it's just I think it might be a sample size. I can't detect anything at this rate, about 200 respondents. Perhaps if I had double, there would be more data to detect that difference. But it was high level in terms of, we kept that front and center in our conversation, wanting to look at differences. And it's kind of building on Kip's comments about like, we need to be putting attention towards this tenant farmer dynamic and how is it different for a farmer landowner, and we care about that. So I really tried to find that, but it wasn't there. So in the report, I make a note about all the findings were aggregated, but I also provide an appendix in which you can surf through like the nitty-gritty of sociodemographic variables, and those are provided against USDA census data to give you a sense of statistical representation of our sample. I hope that's helpful.
No, it's a great point, Alexis. We wanted to make sure we were getting the survey out, and we're also learning by doing in this process, aren't we? And how do we make sure that the survey gets into the hands of as many farmers? And one of the potential biases here is that our survey was a survey monkey. It relied on folks who could access a computer and were savvy, in that medium. So future efforts might involve even a bit more door knocking and really connecting potentially to older farmers who weren't going to use that technology. So, we're aware of some of the gaps there, and we did this project on a very efficient budget. Let's put it that way. And we're learning how to scale up this work in the future. Alexis, there's a great question. You've done some important research looking at other states, particularly Massachusetts, and their dual use program. There's a question about financing and how we might approach that from Alyssa. And it's a great question. As we've read from research by the National Renewable Energy Lab and others, the cost of raising panels is akin to rooftop solar. And we all agree that rooftop solar is a really important way way to democratize access to benefits of solar. Spacing out panels, raising panels may cost more, and there needs to be a way to level the playing field in different ways. Is there anything you'd like to share about your research on the Massachusetts dual use incentive, or looking internationally that could help steer us in the right direction in Connecticut?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think learning what's happening in Massachusetts is novel. So for those folks who don't know, Massachusetts is the first and kind of the only state right now with a feed-in tariff that incentivizes dual use or agrivoltaic projects. So developers receive 6 cents per kilowatt hour for every kilowatt of agrivoltaic solar that they build. And I've heard developers say that's an incredible boost, and they wouldn't be able to do dual use without it. You know, it's making dual use financially viable. But I've also heard on the flip side that the program is a little bit inflexible. So it's really focused on prescribing like system parameters and specifications instead of driving performance standards. So like instead of focusing on what type of agricultural outcomes you want to get out of the agrivoltaic systems, they're focusing on X amount of feet off the ground and X amount of shade underneath the panels. And it's a structure to work from, but it's being revealed as a limiting structure. So it's a learning lesson for us. So how do we take that model? The incentive aspect of it is working, but how do we innovate beyond these inflexible parameters to focus more on outcomes, and what do we want to see out of these systems? So that's all we've got. I mean, we've got Illinois has instituted a point system. We've got New York with a bid preference as well. Or I'm sorry, New York has the point system. Illinois is the bid preference, and Michigan, where I am, mandates that any solar on farmland has pollinator habitat underneath. So there's a diversity of mechanisms out there, but Massachusetts is right next door to Connecticut, and they've got the most robust, and I think it's a great model to build off of. But I wanted to get to the financing bit of the question, and Ethan, I'm probably going to toss it back to you, because maybe we can highlight here the conversation we had with CT Green Bank and thinking about like preferential financing and loans. Maybe you can elaborate on that. You're better well-versed than I am, but maybe it's a good space for it.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. We definitely want to be working with the industry to think about financial mechanisms that make this possible, and whether that's working with Connecticut Green Bank or other green banks, working with the Department of Energy and their loan program. We didn't mention it, but there's $369 billion in clean energy and climate funding in the Inflation Reduction Act, and there are going to be enormous opportunities to think about ways to finance projects that are going to have real benefit for rural communities, particularly for small and mid-sized farms, as Secretary Vilsack has raised that need. So, IFT is engaging with USDA on these issues. We're engaging with DOE as well, and we think there's a real need for innovation there. Looking internationally, it's interesting. France has recently, and I just put this in the chat, has instituted national standards for agrivoltaics and creating basically a tariff structure there. Germany and Italy are doing the same. And we can look to other countries that are really looking to protect their agricultural landscapes while they're advancing the deployment of solar energy resources. The state that we're really looking at right now is New Jersey. In July of 2021, the state passed a number of solar bills, including a 200 megawatt dual use pilot program, and we're still awaiting the qualifications on that. But hopefully that will be coming out later this year. I understand there's some legislation in Colorado and California looking at agrivoltaics as well. So the snowball is growing here in terms of standardization and incentive structures, understanding that it's going to take some financing to steer the market in this direction. And the benefits of that certainly should outweigh the cost. We're getting close to time here. We wanted to share some resources with everyone on the call. And again, this will be in the deck that is shared with these links. Wanted to do a particular shout out to the National AgriSolar Clearinghouse. This is a national platform for case studies, research, and other information on the integration of agrivoltaics and other dual use around the country. The clearinghouse has really been a terrific resource for AFT, and if folks on this call are interested in learning more about what's happening nationally, would certainly steer you there. We have some folks from the clearinghouse on the call. They have a very active webinar schedule, and in fact, there's a session coming up on March 23rd in which some of the most innovative solar designs are going to be presented, including panels that are elevated with cable suspension systems to enable grazing underneath, and other technologies that are right on the cusp of being commercially viable. So definitely check out the AgriSolar Clearinghouse if you're looking for more information on what's happening nationally. Chelsea, bring us home.
All right, well, we have 2 minutes left before our webinar ends. And before we close, I just want to invite Alexis to say a few last words, and then we will close today's webinar, and we hope that you'll stay in touch about this important issue with us. Alexis, do you want to say a few last words?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I don't know where to start. I didn't prepare any remarks, but off the top of my head, I'm just grateful to, I did my graduate research in agrivoltaics here at Michigan Tech. So I was interviewing solar developers and farmers starting in 2019. And this was when the word agrivoltaics was an enigma and people thought I was crazy. And now to move into this space and work with a trusted and honorable organization like AFT, is just incredible to see how things have grown, how we're coming together to actually do the rigorous engagement that is necessary to drive proper policy innovation for this. So it's not just going to come up overnight. We have to do it right from the ground level up. So I'm just grateful to see how things have evolved and grateful for the opportunity to work in partnership together. So thank you for bringing me here.
And with that, I will just say one last thing, that it's been really great to work with Alexis. I have felt very honored that she agreed to do this project and work with us in Connecticut, and her work will be invaluable to the work of AFT in Connecticut and Working Lands Alliance moving forward. So on that note, thank you all for joining us today. I hope that, like I said, you all stay in touch and have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.